The silence of the distant space station was broken only by the soft hum of its engines. Far from Earth, the station was a symbol of human ambition, a small colony nestled on a forgotten world, where families built their homes, raised their children, and lived a peaceful existence. On this quiet night, however, a sudden and terrifying event would shatter their lives forever. In the blink of an eye, the peaceful world was invaded by alien forces. The Zoraxians, a race of advanced beings from a distant galaxy, had arrived with a single objective: to capture the children of the human colony. The operation was swift, almost surgical. The Zoraxians' enormous ships descended silently from the sky, their massive hulls reflecting the light of the twin moons. The first signs of the attack were subtle, just a tremor in the ground, a strange rumbling in the air. But then the sky was filled with the horrifying sound of weapons firing, and the world was plunged into chaos. Sirens wailed across the colony, warning of the invasion. People screamed in panic, running through the streets, desperately trying to protect their children. The Zoraxians had come for them, and they would not leave without their prize. Among the families in the colony, the Jensen family was just finishing their evening meal. The children, Eli, Sarah, and Ben, had been excited for the day's festivities, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. Eli, the oldest at 12, was already planning his next adventure, while his younger sister Sarah played with her dolls. Ben, still only 5, clung to his mother's side, sensing something was wrong even though he couldn't quite understand what it was. The sudden blare of the sirens broke through the calm, and instantly, their father, Peter, sprang into action. "Get to the shelter," Peter shouted, grabbing Eli by the arm and pulling him toward the underground bunker. "Quickly, now." But the shelter was too far. A massive explosion rocked the ground, throwing them all to the ground. The shockwave shattered windows, and the air was thick with dust. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then, without warning, a sleek alien craft descended right into the center of the colony, its metallic surface gleaming in the dim light. The Zoraxians had landed. The family ran for cover, but there was no escape. The Zoraxian forces were too powerful, their ships hovering just above the ground, firing beams that instantly disintegrated anything in their path. Peter managed to get his children into a nearby alley, hidden from view, but his heart raced as he realized how hopeless their situation had become. There was no way they could fight back, no way they could escape. The Zoraxians were here, and they were here for a reason. "Eli," Peter whispered urgently, "stay with your sister. Don't move." Eli nodded, clutching Sarah's hand tightly, his face pale. He could hear the terrifying sounds of alien creatures moving through the streets, their footsteps echoing as they approached. He could hear the screams of other families as they were taken, one by one. Then, from the darkness, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared, followed by the sound of metal scraping against the ground. The Zoraxians were coming closer. Before Peter could react, a bright light illuminated the alley, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. A loud, mechanical noise filled the air, and Eli felt the ground disappear beneath his feet as a tractor beam lifted him and his siblings into the air. His father screamed for them, but the beam was too strong. They were rising into the air, pulled toward the alien craft. Eli's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. He reached out toward his father, desperate to grab him, but the beam separated them, and within seconds, they were pulled into the belly of the alien ship. Inside the ship, the air was cold, sterile, and alien. Eli blinked as he tried to adjust to the dim lighting. He could see the faint outlines of other humans, their faces full of fear and confusion. The Zoraxians had taken them all. "Where are we?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Eli whispered back, his own voice thick with fear. "We'll find a way out, I promise." But deep down, he wasn't sure. He could feel the cold grip of fear tightening around him. But he knew he couldn't show it. Not in front of his little sister. The Zoraxians, towering and humanoid, moved around them, observing, analyzing. Their eyes glowed bright red, and their bodies were covered in sleek, silver armor. They made no attempt to speak to the children or explain why they had been taken. To them, the humans were nothing more than specimens, mere objects to be studied. Eli could see the coldness in their eyes, the lack of emotion. They weren't interested in the children's pain or fear. They were only interested in their research. The ship's interior was unlike anything Eli had ever seen. The walls were lined with strange machines, glowing with an eerie, pulsating light. Some of the machines appeared to be in use, with human captives lying motionless in pods, hooked up to various devices. The Zoraxians seemed to be conducting experiments, but Eli didn't know what kind. He didn't want to know. His focus was on getting out, on getting his siblings to safety. As they were led into a containment area, Eli noticed something strange. The Zoraxians were nervous. They moved with a sense of urgency, constantly checking their monitors and speaking in their alien tongue. Something was wrong. Eli couldn't understand it, but the atmosphere on the ship had changed. There was tension in the air. They were preparing for something. Suddenly, an alarm blared, echoing through the ship. Eli's heart skipped a beat as he saw the Zoraxians stiffen, their expressions shifting from indifferent to concerned. The ground beneath their feet shook once more, but this time, it wasn't from the ship's engines. It was from something much more powerful. A sense of dread spread through the ship like wildfire. Eli realized the Zoraxians were afraid. Something was coming. Eli didn't know what it was, but he could feel it. He didn't know how much time they had left, but the one thing he knew for sure was that if they didn't act soon, they would never escape. He glanced around at the other children, all of them frightened and uncertain, and he made a decision. He would protect his sister. He would do whatever it took to get them out of here. As the alarm echoed louder, Eli heard a voice over the intercom, deep and cold, speaking in a language he didn't understand. But there was one word that stood out to him, a word that would change everything. Human. Eli's pulse quickened. They had made a grave mistake. The Zoraxians had no idea what they had just done. And now, the humans were going to show them what it meant to underestimate them. The Zoraxian ship loomed ominously in the void of space, a dark giant that had swept into human territory without warning. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by the low hum of alien machinery. Eli and his younger sister, Sarah, sat huddled together in a cold metallic cell, their faces pale with fear. The other children, scattered around the room, looked just as lost and frightened. They had no idea what was going to happen to them. All they knew was that their world had been ripped apart in an instant, and they had been taken, captured by beings they didn't understand. Eli sat still, his eyes darting around the cold, sterile room. His thoughts raced, but one thing kept repeating in his mind. Escape. They had to escape. He couldn't leave his sister in this place. He couldn't leave any of them. The children were in a worse situation than they could imagine. The Zoraxians were methodical, calculating, and their technology was far beyond anything humans had ever seen. Whatever their plans for the children were, they had to be stopped. But how? As the hours passed, Eli felt an uncomfortable stillness in the air. There was something strange about the way the Zoraxians moved on their ship. They were always so quiet, always watching, but never speaking to the humans. It was as if they didn't even view the children as real beings. To them, they were experiments, just things to study. Yet, deep down, Eli could sense a shift. The Zoraxians had made a mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and he could feel it. Even in their captivity, the children held something the aliens didn't understand. A power. A spark. In the dim light of the containment room, Eli's gaze shifted toward the far wall, where an alien control panel flickered with unknown symbols. The machines in the ship, though sleek and advanced, seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Eli could feel it. The ship itself was alive with something more than just technology. It was as if the ship was feeding off an unseen force. Something ancient, something powerful. Eli's hand clenched into a fist, a surge of energy rushing through him. He could feel the pulse of the ship deep beneath his skin. It was as though it was calling to him. In the quiet, he heard the soft, steady beat of his own heart. But there was something else, too. A deeper rhythm. It wasn't just the ship's power. It was his. It was human. The more he focused, the more he felt it. A connection that ran deeper than anything he had ever known. Sarah, sitting beside him, looked up at her brother, sensing his tension. "Eli, what's wrong?" Eli blinked, shaking his head to clear the fog of confusion. His pulse was racing now. He couldn't explain it, but he knew something had changed inside him. He could feel it growing, this unknown power, and with it came a terrible realization. The Zoraxians had made a fatal mistake in capturing them. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall outside the cell. The Zoraxians were coming. Eli stood up quickly, his mind already working to put together a plan. He couldn't let them take his sister. He couldn't let them take any of the children. But what could he do? He had no weapons, no training. He was just a kid, just like the others. But there was something in him now, a force, a power, that he couldn't ignore. He had seen the way the Zoraxians treated the children. They were cold, calculating, and indifferent. To them, the children were nothing more than specimens, but the Zoraxians had never known the full extent of human resilience. The power of the human spirit. The door to their cell slid open with a hiss, and 2 Zoraxian guards stepped inside, towering over the children. Their glowing red eyes scanned the room as if they were looking for something, someone. Eli felt his breath catch in his throat. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The moment when he would either find out what this power inside him truly was, or the moment when everything would be lost. The guards advanced, their footsteps heavy. But Eli felt it again, the pulse. It was stronger now. It was no longer just a feeling. It was a force that flowed through him, thrumming with energy. He didn't know how, but somehow he understood. This wasn't just a random surge of power. It was connected to his humanity, to the very core of what it meant to survive. One of the Zoraxian guards reached out, his metallic fingers poised to grab Eli. The moment the alien touched him, something snapped inside Eli. A surge of energy exploded from him, a shockwave that sent the guard stumbling backward. His hand recoiled, as though the very touch of a human was enough to burn him. The other guard stepped forward, but Eli didn't wait. Without thinking, he reached out and pushed. A wave of unseen force rippled through the air, slamming the guard against the wall with a violent crash. The room shook as if the very foundations of the ship were rattling under the strain. The Zoraxians recoiled, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Sarah screamed, her small voice breaking the tension. "Eli, what's happening?" Eli's heart pounded in his chest, his eyes wide with the realization of what he had just done. But before he could respond, the guards regained their composure. They moved faster now, their eyes glowing brighter. The air around them crackled with energy, as though the ship itself was reacting to the sudden disturbance. One of the guards raised a weapon, aiming it at Eli. But something stopped him. The ship. The same force that had surged through Eli seemed to be affecting the alien vessel itself. The walls of the ship hummed in response, and for a brief moment, Eli could feel the ship's power struggle against the presence inside him. But it wasn't enough. Eli was stronger. He didn't know how or why, but the power that surged through him was too much for the Zoraxians to contain. The guard's weapon fizzled and sparked, then exploded in his hands, sending him flying back into the wall. The other guard stood frozen, his expression one of fear. Eli took a step forward, his chest heaving with breath. The Zoraxians had no idea what they were dealing with. They thought they could control the children, that they could subdue them. But they were wrong. The human spirit wasn't something that could be captured, not easily. It was something that could never be tamed. The power inside Eli surged once more, not out of anger, but out of something deeper, a need to protect, to survive. And as he looked at the trembling Zoraxians, he realized something. This was just the beginning. The Zoraxians had awakened something inside the humans that they could never fully control. They had unknowingly made the greatest mistake of their lives. The kids weren't helpless. They weren't just experiments. They were human, and that was the most dangerous thing the Zoraxians could have ever underestimated. The Zoraxian ship rumbled as it shifted through space, drifting silently among the stars. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the kind that could be felt deep in the bones. Eli and the other children were confined to a small cold room, the walls pressing in as though the very ship itself was alive, watching them. But something had changed in Eli, something that had been awakened the moment he tapped into that strange, unseen power. He could feel it pulsing through him, like an electric current. He could feel it drawing him closer to something. But what? And why now? The sound of footsteps echoed down the metallic hall outside the room. Zoraxian soldiers approached, their sharp, alien eyes glowing with a cold, mechanical intelligence. Eli stood up, his hands shaking, but his mind clearer than ever before. He wasn't sure how he had done it before, how he had tapped into that force, but he knew one thing for sure. It was time. Time to stop running. Time to face whatever the Zoraxians had planned for them. The door to the room slid open with a hiss, revealing two towering Zoraxian guards. Their eyes scanned the room, but their gaze paused on Eli, sensing the shift in the air. They knew something had changed. The power that had surged from him was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was the same power that had sent their weapons flying, their ships trembling. But they couldn't understand it. They couldn't control it. And that made them afraid. Eli stepped forward, his feet moving with purpose. Sarah, his younger sister, grabbed his arm, her face full of concern. Eli, don't. We don't know what's happening. It's too dangerous. But Eli didn't answer her. He couldn't. He could feel it now, the pulsing energy inside him. The Zoraxians had no idea what they were about to face. They had thought the children were weak, helpless. They had thought they could break them, that they could use them as experiments. But they hadn't counted on this. They hadn't counted on human resilience, the kind of strength that wasn't just physical, but emotional, mental, and deeply, instinctively human. It was more powerful than anything the Zoraxians could comprehend. The first guard raised his weapon, the sharp tip of it glinting under the dim lights. His eyes narrowed as he aimed it at Eli. But Eli wasn't afraid. He was filled with an intense focus, a clarity that he had never felt before. The moment the weapon was raised, Eli felt the power in him surge again. It was like a wave crashing over him, a force that didn't come from anger, but from something deeper. A need to protect, to survive. With a simple motion, Eli lifted his hand. The air around him shifted. The Zoraxian guard's weapon trembled in his hands before it flew out of his grasp, spinning in midair, crashing against the wall with a loud metallic thud. The guard stumbled back, his eyes wide in disbelief. The second guard reacted instantly, rushing forward with speed and precision. But before he could even make a move, Eli raised his hand again. This time, the guard's body was lifted off the ground, his feet dangling helplessly in the air. Eli's heart raced as the power surged through him. The guard struggled, his claws reaching out, but there was nothing he could do. He was helpless, floating in midair, as if bound by an invisible force. His glowing red eyes flickered with fear. Sarah gasped, "Eli, what's happening to you?" Eli's voice was steady, despite the rush of emotions within him. "I don't know, Sarah, but I think we can use it." The Zoraxian guards were beginning to panic. They were no longer in control. They had no idea what to make of the situation. The ship seemed to respond to the disturbance, its walls humming, pulsing, as though the entire vessel was alive and reacting to the conflict. Eli's chest tightened as he felt the energy coursing through him. It was so strong now, It was almost overwhelming. But he could feel that it wasn't just about the fight. It was about survival. It was about proving that humanity could not be dominated, that they could not be contained. The first guard, who had been knocked backward, regained his footing. His eyes were no longer filled with calculation, but with something Eli had never seen before: fear. The guard hesitated, his hand shaking as he reached for a control panel at his side. He pressed a button, and the room's lights flickered, turning red. The ship's voice boomed through the walls in a harsh alien language. The ship was calling for reinforcements. But it was too late. Eli stepped forward, his body tense with energy. The Zoraxians were no longer in control of the situation. He could feel the ship's power now, thrumming beneath his skin. It was no longer a mystery. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a weapon. And it was no match for what was rising inside him. The second guard, still suspended in midair, let out a low growl as he struggled against the invisible force. He was becoming desperate, his claws swiping through the air. But Eli could feel the power within him growing stronger, and with a single thought, he slammed the guard into the far wall with a deafening crash. The guard collapsed to the floor, groaning in pain, but he was no longer a threat. The first guard, seeing his companion defeated, turned and fled, his footsteps echoing down the hall as he disappeared into the distance. The ship, it seemed, was retreating as well, the walls quieting, the energy pulsing less intensely. But Eli knew this wasn't over. The Zoraxians had tasted human resistance, and they wouldn't give up so easily. He could feel them out there, regrouping, preparing for the next wave. But for now, the children were safe. Sarah rushed to her brother's side, her face filled with awe and fear. "Eli, what did you do?" "I don't know," Eli whispered, his voice shaky now that the adrenaline was fading. "But I think we've just begun." The walls of the room creaked as if responding to his words, and Eli realized that whatever force had surged through him, it was something bigger than just himself. It was the power of humanity, of survival, of defiance against forces that thought they could crush them. The Zoraxians had no idea what they had just unleashed. As Eli looked around the room at the children who were now free from the immediate threat, he knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. The Zoraxians would come for them again, but next time, they wouldn't be facing a group of helpless children. They would be facing humans, and that, Eli knew, was their greatest mistake. The battle had been raging for hours, the sound of weapons clashing and explosions echoing through the desolate landscape. The Zoraxians had underestimated the humans. They thought they could crush them easily, believing them to be weak and fragile. But they were wrong. They had never seen what humans were capable of when pushed to the edge, when their survival instincts were awakened. Eli stood at the forefront, his chest heaving as he stared down the advancing Zoraxian forces. His body was bruised, and the pain was unbearable. But it didn't matter. He had reached a point where the pain was just a part of him, a part of the rage that was building inside. His hands clenched into fists, his mind focused on one thing: survival. Not just his survival, but the survival of the children, of everyone who had been taken, of humanity itself. The Zoraxians were relentless, their weapons designed to cause maximum destruction. They didn't hesitate to use them, firing energy blasts that could disintegrate anything in their path. But the humans were not the helpless beings the Zoraxians had imagined. Every blast, every strike, only seemed to fuel the growing rage inside Eli. The more the Zoraxians attacked, the stronger he became, the more his will to fight grew. It started with a small, almost imperceptible shift. Eli's eyes narrowed. The world around him seemed to slow. His breath quickened, and for the first time, he could feel it. The force, the rage, the energy that surged from deep within him. It wasn't just anger. It was something more primal, more powerful. It was the rage of a species that had survived against impossible odds, of a race that had fought its way through the darkest of times. Humans had always been underestimated, always thought of as weak. But that would change now. Eli raised his arm, and as if in response, the air itself seemed to bend around him. The ground trembled underfoot, and the Zoraxians hesitated, sensing the shift. They could feel the power radiating from him, but they didn't understand it. They thought they had seen every weapon, every defense, every form of power that could be unleashed. But this was different. This was something new, something terrifying. The first Zoraxian to step forward was the leader, a tall, imposing figure with glowing red eyes. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at Eli. "You are nothing," he spat, his voice cold and mechanical. "You are weak. You will bow before the Zoraxian Empire." Eli's eyes locked onto the leader. The Zoraxian's arrogance was clear, but it only fueled the fire inside him. Eli's body trembled, but not from fear. His muscles coiled like a spring, and without warning, he rushed forward. His speed was almost unnatural. The Zoraxian leader fired, but the blast missed, grazing the air beside Eli. In the blink of an eye, Eli was upon him. With a guttural roar, Eli slammed his fist into the Zoraxian's chest. The force of the blow was enough to send the leader crashing backward, his body slamming into a rock with a sickening thud. The Zoraxian struggled to get up, but Eli wasn't finished. He moved faster than the Zoraxian could react, his body fueled by pure, unrelenting rage. His fists became weapons, each punch landing with terrifying precision. The Zoraxian leader's armor cracked, and the once confident alien was left gasping for breath. Eli was no longer thinking. His mind was consumed by the need to survive, to fight back, to show the Zoraxians that humanity would not be broken. The rest of the Zoraxian forces watched in stunned silence. They had never seen anything like this before. A human, fighting with the strength of 100, driven by a rage that seemed endless. Eli wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every human who had ever been oppressed, for every human who had ever been underestimated, for every human who had fought against impossible odds. As the leader struggled to rise, Eli moved with deadly intent. His hands crackled with an energy that felt almost electric. He reached out, and the air seemed to respond to him. The ground shook, and the Zoraxian leader was lifted off his feet, his body suspended in the air as if by an invisible force. Eli's eyes burned with intensity as he spoke, his voice low and full of fury. "You thought you could break us," Eli said, his words laced with an intensity that made the air itself tremble. "You thought we were weak. But we've been fighting for our survival since the day we were born. We will never bow to you." The leader's eyes widened in shock as Eli's power surged, crushing the Zoraxians' will to fight. The once mighty alien, who had thought himself invincible, was now helpless in the face of the human rage that had been unleashed. Eli let out a final deafening roar, and with a violent motion, sent the leader crashing to the ground. The alien's body lay motionless, his once glowing eyes dimmed. For a moment, there was silence. The Zoraxians, who had been so confident, so sure of their superiority, now stood frozen in shock. They had never seen a human fight like this. They had never seen a human unleash such power, such rage. But the moment of shock passed quickly, and the Zoraxians regained their composure. They moved forward, weapons raised, determined to finish what they had started. But they didn't know it yet. They had already lost. Eli's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clearer than ever. The rage was still there, but it had become something more controlled, something he could use. It was a power he could wield, and with it he would fight until his last breath. He would protect those who could not protect themselves. He would stand against the Zoraxians and show them what it meant to face humanity at its fiercest. The Zoraxians attacked again, but this time it was different. Eli wasn't just reacting. He was in control. He moved with speed and precision, his body flowing like water, striking with the force of a storm. Each punch, each kick, each strike was a testament to the human spirit, to the power that lay dormant in every human being. The Zoraxians began to retreat, their weapons falling silent as they realized they were no match for the fury of a single human. They had underestimated humanity's will to survive, and now they were paying the price. As the last of the Zoraxian forces fled, Eli stood alone, breathing heavily but standing tall. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of the fight, but he had won. The humans had unleashed their rage, and it had been enough. It had been more than enough. The sky above was dark with the threat of a coming storm, but it was not the weather that caused the tense silence that hung over the battlefield. For weeks, Eli and his team had been preparing for this moment. The last stand. The final reckoning. It was all or nothing. The Zoraxians had pushed humanity to the brink of extinction, their attacks merciless, their forces overwhelming. Yet, here they were, still standing, still fighting. The human spirit was not so easily crushed. Eli stood at the front, his eyes scanning the horizon, where the enemy forces were gathering. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he refused to let fear take root. He had seen what humanity was capable of. He had felt their strength, their resolve, and it was enough to keep him going. The Zoraxians may have been powerful, but they had underestimated one thing: the fury that lay in the heart of every human who had been pushed to the edge. Behind him, his team was ready. Each one was a soldier, hardened by the battles they had fought, driven by the same desire: to survive. But there was something more at play now, something deeper, a sense of unity, of purpose, that went beyond mere survival. This wasn't just about winning. It was about sending a message. The message that humanity would never give up. They would never be defeated, no matter the cost. The Zoraxians, on the other hand, were confident. Their numbers were overwhelming. Their technology advanced beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. They had destroyed cities, wiped out entire fleets, and now they believed they would crush what little was left of humanity. But they hadn't counted on the fact that humans would never stop fighting. Eli and his team were the last line of defense, the last hope for a world on the brink of destruction. As the enemy forces began to advance, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The Zoraxians moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, their weapons poised for the final assault. Eli could hear the distant hum of their energy cannons charging, the sound growing louder with each passing second. His team shifted into position, ready to engage in what could very well be their last fight. "We've trained for this," Eli said, his voice steady, though inside, his heart raced. "This is our time. We don't let them win. Not today." The soldiers around him nodded in agreement, their faces hard, eyes focused. They had no intention of going down quietly. The first wave of Zoraxians hit with devastating force, their weapons firing in unison. The energy blasts lit up the night sky, but Eli and his team were ready. They had set traps, prepared countermeasures, and adapted to the Zoraxian tactics. As the blasts rained down upon them, the humans moved with speed and agility, avoiding the worst of the attacks. The ground shook with each impact, but the humans stood firm. Eli dove into the fray, his body moving instinctively as he fired his weapon at the approaching Zoraxians. His aim was precise, each shot landing where it was needed, but it was clear this was only the beginning. The Zoraxians were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. No matter how many they took down, more kept coming. Then something unexpected happened. The sky lit up in a brilliant flash of blue, and Eli felt a surge of energy race through his veins. His breath caught in his throat. It was as if the very air around him had shifted, becoming charged with an energy he couldn't explain. For a brief moment, he felt invincible, like the power of every human who had ever fought for survival was coursing through him. He wasn't sure if it was just the adrenaline or something more, but Eli felt a new strength within him. With this new surge of power, he charged forward, his body moving faster, his strikes harder. He was everywhere at once, a blur of motion that left the Zoraxians stunned and disoriented. His team followed suit, and together, they pushed forward, fighting as though they were one unstoppable force. The Zoraxians faltered for the first time. They had not expected this level of resistance. They had believed their victory was certain, that no one could stand against them. But they had underestimated the human spirit. The strength that came from knowing that everything, family, friends, the future, depended on their success. It was a power that no alien force could ever truly understand. But the Zoraxians were not so easily defeated. They regrouped, calling in reinforcements, their commanders barking orders into their communication devices. Their weapons grew more deadly, their strategy more sophisticated. They had begun to adapt to the human tactics, using advanced tech to counteract the humans' advantages. The battle escalated, becoming more chaotic with each passing minute. Eli fought on, never slowing, his heart pounding in his chest. The energy within him burned hotter, and he could feel the ground beneath him trembling with each strike. His hands moved like lightning, firing, slashing, dodging. He was everywhere, his body a blur of motion as he pushed forward, determined to stop the Zoraxians once and for all. But the Zoraxian forces were not backing down. Their numbers were overwhelming, and Eli could see that the humans were starting to lose ground. The fatigue was setting in, and the Zoraxians were closing in. He knew they couldn't hold out much longer. Just as the battle seemed to reach its breaking point, a strange sound filled the air, a low hum, almost like a warning. Eli turned, his eyes scanning the horizon, and then he saw it, a massive ship descending from the sky. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, its sleek design cutting through the air like a blade. The ship's weapons powered up, its cannons glowing with ominous energy. Eli's heart skipped a beat. It was the final weapon, the weapon that could turn the tide of the battle. The ship's cannons fired in a massive burst, the energy bolts slamming into the Zoraxian forces, obliterating them with devastating force. The Zoraxians faltered, their confidence crumbling as the energy wave washed over them. The ship fired again, and then again, each blast hitting its mark with deadly precision. The Zoraxians tried to regroup, but it was too late. The battle was over. Eli stood among the wreckage, his chest heaving as he looked around at the aftermath. The Zoraxian forces had been wiped out. The battlefield was quiet now, the sound of the storm the only noise that remained. His team gathered around him, their faces grim but relieved. They had won. Against all odds, humanity had survived. But Eli knew that the cost had been high. Many had fallen in the fight, and though the battle was over, the war was far from finished. The Zoraxians had been defeated, but there were others out there. Others who would try to take what was left of humanity. But for now, Eli allowed himself a brief moment of peace. The final reckoning had come, and humanity had proven that it would never back down, no matter the odds.